Hi, I'm Josh Hutchinson, and she's Sarah Jack, and this is Witch Hunt Podcast.
Welcome back to our Podcasthon 2025 series, Ending Witch Hunts. Our nonprofit End Witch Hunts is a Podcasthon participating charity, and Podcasthon is a global movement to spread the word about charities and causes. We have a great website, so please check it out, endwitchhunts.org, to learn more and to donate.
In today's episode, we are going to continue telling the witch hunt story by covering sorcery accusation-related violence, also known as SARV, in Papua New Guinea.
Papua New Guinea is located north of Australia and is a culturally diverse island nation.
Yes, comprising the eastern half of the island of New Guinea, Papua New Guinea is home to between 12 and 17 million people. The exact count is hard to come by because of the remote nature of many villages, especially in the highlands.
If you aren't aware of how large this community is, then how many languages they have is going to be a surprise to you. It's 840 languages. It's the most linguistically diverse nation in the world. That's Papua New Guinea.
It's also home to great natural beauty and great ecological and geographic diversity. You see landscapes such as beautiful coasts, high mountains, 15,000 feet or more, and flatlands like the Australian outback, as well as very long, beautiful rivers and valleys.
But amid this amazing landscape and amazing communities of people, they are experiencing violence, including gender-based violence and sexual violence. According to the United States Institute of Peace, each year, more than 1.5 million women and girls in Papua New Guinea experience the gender-based violence tied to intercommunal conflict, political intimidation, domestic abuse, and other causes.
The good news is many individuals and organizations are advocating for solutions to these problems. Today, we'll discuss a few of the people involved.
Let's peel back the layers of witch hunting in Papua New Guinea.
Today's witchcraft terminology is different than what you've heard in other episodes because cultures around the world, including those in Papua New Guinea, use different language to discuss similar issues such as witch hunting.
While we're on the subject of terminology, there are a couple more things to know. One of the national languages of Papua New Guinea is Tok Pisin, which is an English Creole language.
Looking at different biblical translations, we can see that Bibles published on the island have different translations of the words that are translated as witch in English. For instance, the Hebrew word translated as witch in English Bibles is translated as Sanguma in the Tok Pisin Bible, published by the Bible Society of Papua New Guinea, and appears in 9 Old Testament verses.
Talking about biblical translations and words for witch or witchcraft is significant because colonialism introduced diabolical or evil types of witchcraft concepts to many cultures around the globe. And we talk about those in many of our other episodes. So we're not going to dig into that now. But this one is really important to talk about because the term Sanguma is something that we attach to the term that we refer to as a witch in the Bible. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live is one you may have heard. But Sanguma, which is the terminology used there, is a word that's evolved over the years. And in its original form, it didn't translate easily to English. Like witch, Sanguma represents someone to fear. But Sanguma was originally defined as a kind of a warrior who attacked and tortured members of rival communities to instill terror in their enemies.
Today, Sanguma means different things in different communities in Papua New Guinea. Sanguma can refer to a malevolent supernatural force or being. In other places, Sanguma can mean either the act of sorcery or the person who commits the act. And in some places, a sanguma is a helpful magic practitioner.
You will really enjoy our Papua New Guinea episodes where we have great discussions around this concept of Sanguma. And we learned a lot from experts Miranda Forsyth and Anton Lutz. And they've both done direct advocacy within the communities. And that's how they're able to tell us all about it. Now we're going to return to the term we mentioned at the very beginning of the episode, sorcery accusation related violence, SARV. In Papua New Guinea, the term sorcery accusation related violence is used to emphasize that the accusation of sorcery is the central issue leading to a violence.
Yes, it's about the accusation, not about any act of sorcery. SARV is a complex phenomenon with no single cause. In a previous episode, Miranda Forsyth told us that SARV can be understood through the metaphor of a wildfire, requiring a conducive landscape and a trigger event.
Miranda Forsyth is a professor and a socio-legal researcher at the School of Regulation and Global Governance at the Australian National University. And she's also the director of a nonprofit we spoke about in our first episode in the series called the International Network Against Witchcraft Accusations and Ritual Attacks.
Let's talk about her metaphor of the wildfire.
Although a lot of what we're talking about in this episode is very specific to Papua New Guinea, this incredible metaphor that she has developed really represents how witch hunts quickly become a wildfire in any place in the world, in any part of history. It's because there's a conducive landscape, like dry brush, providing fuel for the wildfire.
This landscape includes two key elements: belief that misfortune can be caused by supernatural forces, and a socioeconomic dimension.
That socioeconomic dimension of the conducive landscape for SARV in Papua New Guinea includes poverty, uncertainty, resource scarcity, unequal wealth distribution, unemployment, and a lack of adequate social safety nets.
If you've listened to previous episodes, you know these factors are impacts in other countries as well.
These are the factors that create environments where individuals and communities are most vulnerable to misfortune and may resort to accusations of sorcery as an explanation or as a means to address their challenges.
This is a lightning strike ignites a wildfire. The trigger event sparks accusations of sorcery.
I'm going to tell you what some of those trigger events could be: death or sickness, especially if it's the death of a child or an unusual death. And almost any death can potentially be attributed to sorcery.
There are various motives for accusations. Sometimes people are after personal gain, such as trying to obtain land, or they're desiring to resolve conflicts.
I have some new terminology to possibly introduce to you today. Yesterday, we were speaking about Africa and talked about natural healers, traditional healers. And in Papua New Guinea, there's a role that diviners play in their communities, and they are called glassmen or glassmaries. And sometimes their role is in identifying supposed sorcerers. There are self proclaimed spiritual warriors who, unfortunately, are identifying individuals as sorcerers.
And want to talk about who are the victims of sorcery accusation related violence. As we discussed at the top of the episode, gender based violence is widespread in Papua New Guinea as some of the highest levels of gender based violence in the world. SARV is a gendered form of violence in most parts of the world, has been throughout history that women have been the targets most frequently. And that's true in most of the provinces of Papua New Guinea, but not all. For example, on the island of Bougainville, it's primarily men and boys who are accused and tortured because of the belief that they are doing supernatural harm. Throughout Papua New Guinea, disturbingly, there's a trend of children being accused. We talked about that in yesterday's episode as well, with in the context of Africa, about the children being accused and abandoned. And unfortunately, in Papua New Guinea, children accused of sorcery are often murdered.
In Papua New Guinea, a lot of work and research has been done around SARV, and there is a holistic approach that needs to be used to address it. There's not a single solution, and we're going to tell you about some of those initiatives. There is local community action where within the communities in this advocacy effort, young men are speaking out against the violence as role models. And this method is showing positive results.
Religious leadership is needed in Papua New Guinea to address SARV. Fortunately, last year, Pope Francis visited the island and called upon the church to stand by the victims of false sorcery accusations. While Pope Francis was in Papua New Guinea, he met with a wonderful woman named Sister Lorena Janal, who is associated with the organization Missio, which is a worldwide Catholic mission organization. It's part of the pontifical missions. So the Pope is involved in overseeing that. And Sister Lorena has been working for years in Papua New Guinea to support victims of SARV. She has rescued victims from the grips of their attackers. And she has housed women and helped them get back on their feet following accusations. And Sister Lorena Janal and the Missio organization are responsible for creating World Day Against Witch Hunts, which is recognized and observed every August 10th, which is the anniversary of a date when Sister Lorena rescued a woman from an attack.
If you have your device handy, open up your calendar right now and write on August 10th, World Day Against Witch Hunts. It's a easy way for you to participate in raising awareness by either sharing one of our episodes, share one of the websites from one of the organizations we're covering this week, or make a statement acknowledging World Day Against Witch Hunts. Although August 10th as World Day Against Witch Hunts is widely recognized by hundreds of advocates right now, we still need to raise awareness about it. So please jump in on August 10th and say something about ending witch hunts and World Day Against Witch Hunts. The other part of the holistic approach is training healthcare workers. In Papua New Guinea, they are developing programs to train the frontline healthcare workers to better address the sorcery concerns and explain causes of death and sickness. There's a couple things that can happen when someone has experienced harm from SARV. They may be afraid to go in for medical treatment because they've been branded Sanguma or a witch and not receive treatment that they really need to live or survive their injuries because of their fear of the response of the medical workers. And so educating healthcare to recognize that these victims are living in fear and need continued protection is really key. And then, as I mentioned, explaining the causes of death and sickness is really critical because the fear of bad magic and sorcery is so often attributed to death worldwide.
So it's important to support local action and insiders who have local knowledge and who have legitimacy within their communities, but they can be supported by connecting them with external resources and networks which have the data and resources that are needed to support them in whatever they need.
And another aspect of this holistic approach is education. Communities, the local communities experiencing SARV need to receive education, but also we need to be talking about it globally with the wider world so that the reality of what's happening is understood.
Right. Awareness needs to be raised in Papua New Guinea and globally about SARV and witch hunts more generally so that more people can get involved in the advocacy, the activism, pooling resources and information together so that these holistic approaches can be tested and people can learn from what other people are doing also. So it's very important to be raising awareness.
I want to say, Josh, sorry to interrupt you, but when we podcast and we are amplifying these stories, it's not just to report. It's not just so, oh, you might know a little bit more. It's so that you, our listener, are engaged with this real crisis that's happening. And if you talk about it within your circle, you may have somebody who has a platform or a resource or some social power or agency that can contribute on the ground in a real way. So, using this podcast to talk about Papua New Guinea and the whole story of witch hunting is for you to learn, but then for you to turn around and talk to your friends and family about.
Now, to put all the holistic approach, to put all the ingredients together for the holistic approach and to implement that approach, a sorcery national action plan was adopted in 2014. This national action plan includes five main steps, which are to support these survivors through offering counseling and other services for them, to support change in the healthcare sector through advocacy and the healthcare worker training that Sarah talked about previously. The third step is prevention, which involves advocacy and communications. Fourth, legal improvements are needed to both protect individuals from these actions in the first place through policing and to prosecute those who perpetrate the violence to bring them to justice. And then the fifth step is to continue to do research to quantify the scope of the problem, the scale of the problem, how many people are getting accused and what's happening to them, and to look at what are best practices, what's working in different communities to affect positive change. So, more research is constantly needed. We've talked about that in a number of previous episodes.
In 2024, Josh and I went to the Witchcraft and Human Rights Conference in Lancaster, which was a global meeting of human rights experts. And some of the Papua New Guinea advocates were there, and we got to learn from them in person and hear firsthand what is happening on the ground and what efforts are seeing successes there.
Yeah, at the conference, we met Professor Miranda Forsyth, who we've already mentioned in this episode. We also met Professor Philip Gibbs, who's the president of Divine Word University in Papua New Guinea, and also works with an organization we'll be talking about shortly called Stop Sorcery Violence. We also met William Kapongi, who's a research officer at the National Research Institute in Papua New Guinea and a member of the advisory committee of Inawara, the International Network Against Witchcraft Accusations and Ritual Attacks, of which Miranda is the director. Another tireless advocate in Papua New Guinea, who we weren't able to meet at this conference, but have spoken to several times through the miracle known as Zoom, is Anton Lutz. He's our previous guest of the podcast, and he grew up doing mission work in Papua New Guinea and continues to work against sorcery accusation related violence.
He also serves on the International Network's Advisory Committee and created a teaching resource for children called Peter and Grace Make a Difference. And you can check that project out through a link in our show notes.
We've mentioned Inawara today, the international network, and another organization I just alluded to that you should be aware of is Stop Sorcery Violence.
It's a joint collaboration between researchers, the Papua New Guinea government, and civil society.
Their website, stopsorceryviolence.org, offers resources for individuals, organizations, community, government, policymakers, leaders, and others who are interested in learning about SARV.
Stop Sorcery Violence aims to make public the information gathered around this issue and about what's currently being done in the space.
They also offer important information on how to get help if you or someone you know has been accused of sorcery or is in danger in any way from a sorcery accusation.
Stop Sorcery Violence Coalition is an example of the types of collaborations we are saying are so necessary and are an example of what could be very powerful in Africa. You heard on yesterday's Podcasthon 2025 episode on ending witch hunts in Africa that Leah Igwe discussed the importance of all stakeholders coming together: individuals, organizations, community, government, policymakers, leaders, and anyone who's interested in helping.
And you can support all these advocates and organizations that we've discussed by sharing their social media, sharing podcast episodes involving them, and by making financial contributions.
And I just want to remind you that all of this that we're talking about is to save lives. And it's because of the victims. It's because of these innocent children, women, and men by the thousands who are finding themselves on the wrong, both sides of an accusation of witchcraft is wrong, but on the most dangerous side of a witchcraft accusation. So it's really incredible and offers a lot of hope that so many groups are working in so many places to confront something that has gone on for long, way too long, and needs confronted delicately. We want to extend our sincere gratitude to podcasthon.org for providing this week of charity focus. Other podcasts across the network are also highlighting various worthy causes, and we are so honored to have this opportunity to share the story of this mission that's so dear to our hearts, the work of tireless advocates around the world who want to end witch hunts.
Thank you so much for joining us for Podcasthon. This is an important week. We're hoping that you've learned a lot and that you are now aware of these wonderful organizations that you can help out as we outlined above.
Tomorrow, our Podcasthon series takes us to Asia and a look at what witch branding is there.
So thank you again. Be sure to tune in tomorrow and have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.